All right, let's jump right into this fascinating explainer of an internet war over, wait for it, a grilled cheese sandwich. I mean, on the surface, a massive corporate fast food chain getting into a very public feud with a tiny mom-and-pop deli? It's pure comedy. But if we dig a little deeper, it is actually a masterclass in behavioral sociology. It completely exposes the hidden architecture of social media virality and honestly the intense psychological pressure cookers we kind of force ourselves into every single day.
Just look at the sheer scale of this mismatch. On the left side, you've got Big League Burger, or BLB, this massive corporate behemoth sitting on 4 million followers. And then on the right, you've got Girl Cheesing. It's this tiny East Village local deli run by a teenager named Jack with a grand total of 645 followers. The whole conflict kicks off when the corporation launches a new item called Grandma Special. And guys, this isn't just some nostalgic marketing name, it is a microscopic, undeniable theft of Jack's 85-year-old grandmother's exact recipe. We're talking the specific sourdough, Munster, cheddar, apple jam, and honey mustard, the whole shebang.
So Jack wakes up, sees this blatant theft, and reacts instantly. But here's the thing, he doesn't call a lawyer. Instead, he speaks the native dialect of the internet. He just posts a side-by-side screenshot with a single word, sure, followed by a side-eye emoji. That's it. And it is asymmetrical digital warfare at its absolute finest. He brilliantly exploits the vulnerability of a faceless corporation that is desperately trying to manufacture this relatable, friendly persona. In one swoop, Jack signals to the entire internet that a corporate Goliath is quietly trying to crush a local David.
But, a good underdog narrative isn't always enough to take off on its own. The architecture of virality actually requires a mathematical spark, and that spark almost always happens when an unpredictable variable just randomly enters the equation. In this case, it's an 80s pop star named Marld, who just so happens to be a regular at Jack's Deli. She sees his tweet and retweets it to her 12.5 million followers, actively shaming Big League Burger. Boom! That single action validates Jack's narrative, connects all these isolated communities, and locks the entire situation into a massive algorithmic feedback loop.
Okay, so once that digital mob forms, the corporate machine has to respond, right? But who is actually in the digital cockpit at BLB? It's Pepper. She's a stressed-out high school senior who was basically drafted by her executive mother to run the corporate account, simply because, well, she's a teenager and she knows how to post. Feeling all this immense pressure, Pepper fires back at Jack's Deli with a quote from the movie Mean Girls. Oof. It is a critical miscalculation. When a giant corporation tries to punch down at a family business using teenage snark, yeah, the power dynamic completely flips. The internet turns on them in a heartbeat.
And this is what activates the most aggressive phase of the internet mob, which gets totally amplified by YouTubers demanding their followers spam BLB with cat emojis under the hashtag #KilledByBLB. But we have to ask, why do people actually do this? I mean, they don't really care about sourdough or apple jam. It all comes down to a concept called de-individuation. Basically, when you join a massive hashtag campaign, you lose your sense of individual accountability. You get this huge, righteous dopamine hit. The whole thing just feels like a frictionless multiplayer video game, rather than, the actual destruction of a family's livelihood.
But the damage to the real people behind those screens is intensely physical. And here is the absolute wildest irony of this whole story. The very next morning, Jack and Pepper have to go to the exact same elite high school. They are physically standing on a pool deck, smelling like chlorine, aggressively arguing with each other over 4 p.m. swim lanes. And they are completely oblivious to the fact that they are currently destroying each other on a global digital stage. It's honestly a staggering example of how tightly we compartmentalize our different environments.
So the sheer weight of this invisible, everyday pressure definitely requires an outlet. These kids can't show any weakness to their demanding parents, and they absolutely cannot show vulnerability at their hyper-competitive school. Since this generation of hyper-scheduled students really lacks physical spaces, like, parks or cafes to just hang out and be teenagers, Jack actually engineered a digital third place. He coded an anonymous chat app called Weasel. He built a space for them to exist entirely without the heavy historical baggage of their own faces.
Now, we're constantly warned that anonymous apps are these toxic breeding grounds, right? But Weasel functions completely differently. Stripped of their real-world identities and randomly assigned these little animal avatars, the teens quietly built an authentic, hidden support network. For example, Pooja, who is Pepper's most ruthless academic rival offline, operates as Bunny on the app, and she actually uses her anonymity to share detailed AP study guides to help the very students she is actively competing against in real life.
So what Weasel does is completely shatter the sociological myth known as digital dualism.
It's this flawed assumption that our offline lives are the real ones and our digital lives are somehow fake or secondary or just a performance. In reality, as we see here, when you strip away the performative stress of an elite high school hierarchy, those digital masks don't make the kids fake. Actually, scratch that, it's the exact opposite. The masks expose their truest, most profoundly authentic and vulnerable selves.
Which brings us right back to Jack and Pepper. Offline, they view each other as these totally flat, two-dimensional stereotypes. To him, she's valedictorian Barbie. To her, he's the irritating class clown. But online, randomly assign the identities of Bluebird and Wolf, they are literally laying their souls bare to one another. They talk about the terrifying void of their futures. They become each other's absolute closest confidants, completely unaware of who is actually typing behind the screen.
Of course, the barrier between these two worlds just can't hold forever. It completely shatters during a totally mundane scheduling meeting at a local bakery. Picture this. Jack is just eating a bagel, right? He glances over at Pepper's illuminated phone resting on the table. He sees the blue verified checkmark. He sees the Big League Burger interface. And then he sees a drafted cat gif just sitting there waiting to be sent. That digital dualism vanishes in this nauseating wave as Jack realizes his massive corporate nemesis is sitting right across the table from him.
Disgusted, Jack walks back to his deli, totally bracing himself for complete financial disaster. But instead, he finds a massive line of customers stretching all the way down the block. This right here is the attention economy in action. In this ecosystem, human eyeballs and engagement are the core currency, which means outrage pays out just as effectively as love. The internet's burning desire to support the underdog actually translated into massive physical foot traffic. The mob effectively saved the deli.
But the next morning, reality really sets in. Pepper approaches Jack with this vulnerable olive branch. Homemade, so sorry blondies. And Jack realizes a really hard truth. His family's financial survival now completely depends on this feud continuing. So sitting right there in homeroom, they forge this brilliant, secret pact they call Cheese and State. Offline, a complete truce, they are friends. But online, they agree to secretly choreograph a fake, ruthless Twitter war to just completely game the algorithm. It is the exact definition of kayfabe, basically professional wrestling tactics applied to a highly optimized corporate marketing campaign.
It's honestly a brilliant strategy, but the psychological toll of keeping it up is immense, because they haven't really escaped their masks, have they? They've just swapped them out for new ones. Take a second and really think about your own feed. When you look at your own social media presence, how much of it is just a deliberate performance? How often do our carefully curated online masks obscure the exhausted, incredibly complex human being actually holding the phone? We are so conditioned to flatten the world, to view brands as monoliths and our own peers as simple stereotypes, mostly because the screen acts as this filter that just completely removes empathy.
And that brings us to the final, lingering thread of this entire explainer. See, Jack and Pepper successfully firewalled their fake Twitter war from their real-life friendship, but they completely forgot about the architecture of the Weasel app itself, where they are still spending their nights talking deeply as Wolf and Bluebird. Remember, Jack programmed a literal ticking clock into that code, a trigger that automatically unmasks users who chat privately for too long. So, what happens when that digital safety net just completely evaporates? What happens to their fragile reality when the algorithm finally fires and they realize their most trusted, anonymous confidant is the exact person they've been at war with this entire time? Now that is a question worth logging off to think about.